flat!
In 1887, an experiment shattered the scientific community. Michelson and Morley tried to check the speed of the Earth through the ether as it orbited the Sun by passing light in two directions, one in the direction of the Earth's travel and one at right angles, and then comparing them for differences. They expected to measure a speed of about 30 kilometers per second. To their amazement, there was no movement of this order. They called it a null result. They actually measured 1 to 10 kilometers per second, but it was still called a null result. They rushed out the theory called the Fitzgerald-Lorentz contraction. This claimed that the tube in line with the direction of movement shortens as it moves through the ether. There was no evidence whatsoever for this. It was only a way of getting over the implication that the Earth was stationary. Later, in 1905 and 1915, Einstein produced his relativity theories, which overcame the troublesome Michelson-Morley experiment by simply abolishing the ether. The whole theory is riddled with contradictions and problems. In 1913, Sagnac carried out a simple experiment of passing light in opposite directions around a table and recombining them. This produced interference fringes. He then rotated the whole table at 2 revolutions per second and found that the fringes changed. This result has very significant implications in science. It works as follows. A beam of light leaves the light source at the bottom left-hand corner and is split into 2 different beams, which we have coloured red and blue just to distinguish them. They travel round the circuit in opposite directions until they eventually reach the splitter, which also recombines them. There they then go on to the photographic plate, where they have interference fringes. In this simplified version, we see that the beam is split into 2, the red and the blue again, and they go round the circuit and are recombined at the splitter and recombining prism, so that they again produce the fringes on the photographic plate. Now let us rotate the table. Before we do so, there is the very important subject of the effect of the ether. The Michelson-Morley experiment failed to detect the 30 kilometers per second motion of the Earth through the ether. So as to overcome this problem, Einstein simply abolished the ether in his relativity theory. The very significant result of the Sagnac experiment was that it proved that the ether existed. Let us see how it did this. It is a fundamental feature of relativity that it claims that as there is no ether, light travels away from a source at the same speed relative to the source, whether the source is moving or not. Thus, whether the table is turning or not, the fringe patterns should stay the same. But if the ether exists, once the light has left the source, the speed of the light is controlled by the ether, independent of the speed of the table, mirrors, etc., as we see here. So let us see what happens when we rotate the table. Here, the light is split, and the red and blue lights go in opposite directions. But notice that the left-hand mirror has moved around in such a direction that the distance the red light has to travel is further. Now in relativity, the same time should be taken because the splitter is also moving and the distance between them is the same. But now imagine that the ether exists and the speed of the light is controlled by the stationary ether. Imagine the ether like a thick treacle that limits how fast the light can travel, independent of the motion of the light source, the splitter, or the mirrors. The result is that the red light takes longer to reach the left-hand mirror. Similarly, the right-hand mirror is coming towards the blue light, so it reaches the mirror quicker. After they change ends, the red light again takes longer to reach the recombiner, whilst the blue light gets there quicker again. So they reach the photographic plate with a delay between them, and this changes the fringe pattern. In fact, Sagnac, using the speed of the rotation of the table, calculated how much the fringes should change, and found that they did change by just that amount. The crucial feature of this experiment is that it demonstrates that the ether does exist, which demolishes relativity. How does the scientific establishment deal with this result? By muddying the waters with scientific gobbledygook. Wikipedia says, "In the above discussion, the rotation mentioned is a rotation with respect to an inertial reference frame. Since this experiment does not involve a relativistic velocity, the same wording is valid both in the context of classical electrodynamics and special relativity." How on earth can it be valid in both theories? It clearly proves that the ether exists because the speed of the light is controlled by the ether, independent of the rotating table and mirrors. This Sagnac effect is used by airlines for their compass directions. As the plane turns, the change in the fringes are translated into a change in the direction of the plane that then registers on the cockpit compass. In addition, I have received comments from 2 scientists complaining that they were never taught about the Sagnac experiment. The first said, "After 35 years as a professional physicist with a thesis in relativity, I only learned of Sagnac's experiment last year." Another correspondent complained that his professors never mentioned these important experiments. Dear Mr. Bowden, thank you for your enjoyable and well-written website. I've enjoyed visiting there today. I was especially interested in your comments on geocentricity, which, as noted, are controversial. The amazing thing is that none of the experiments cited were ever discussed in my undergraduate education, nor the implications cited. All my life I have heard the story of how Copernicus's theory came to prevail. I would have thought that major experimental evidence, already in existence, and calling the theory into question, would have at least been cited. One feels cheated as a student, of course, to keep finding 25 years later these bodies of contrarian evidence that never are mentioned in the classroom, unless a student has already researched the topics and brings them up. Yet again, we have the suppression of scientific evidence that supports creation and geocentricity.
In the mid-19th century, a Frenchman named Léon Foucault became famous for swinging pendulums and claiming their consequent motions were proof of the Earth's diurnal rotation. Since then, Foucault pendulums have regularly been swinging at museums and exposition halls worldwide, purporting to provide everlasting perpetual proof of the heliocentric spinning ball Earth theory. The truth is, however, unbeknownst to most of the duped public, that Foucault's pendulum is a failed experiment which proves nothing but how easy it is for pseudoscience to deceive the malleable masses. Lady Blunt says, This pendulum, modern scientists tell us, affords a visible proof that we are living on a whirling globe, which, according to a work on science, now before me, is spinning upon its so-called axis at the rate of over 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, and in addition to other motions is rushing on an everlasting tour around the sun, the diameter of which is said to be 813,000 miles, and its weight 354,936 times greater than the Earth, from which it is said to be about 93 million miles distant, at the rate of over 1,000 miles per minute. Now, to prove that the Earth really has these motions, a pendulum is suspended at the show. The showman sets motion and bids the gaping world of thoughtless men and women to behold a proof that we are living on a whirling globe which is rushing away through space. William Carpenter says, "Astronomers have made experiments with pendulums which have been suspended from the interior of high buildings, and have exulted over the idea of being able to prove the rotation of the earth on its axis by the varying direction taken by the pendulum over a prepared table underneath, asserting that the table moved round under the pendulum, instead of the pendulum shifting and oscillating in different directions over the table. But, since it has been found that, as often as not, the pendulum went round the wrong way for the rotation theory, chagrin has taken place of exultation, and we have a proof of the failure of astronomers in their efforts to substantiate their theory." So to begin with, Foucault's pendulums do not uniformly swing in any one direction. Sometimes they rotate clockwise, and sometimes counterclockwise. Sometimes they fail to rotate, and sometimes they rotate far too much. Scientists who have repeated variations of the experiment have conceded time and again that, quote, "it was difficult to avoid giving the pendulum some slight lateral bias at starting. The behavior of the pendulum actually depends on 1. The initial force beginning its swing, and 2. The ball and socket joint used, which most readily facilitates circular motion over any other. The supposed rotation of the earth is completely inconsequential and irrelevant to the pendulum's swing. If the alleged constant rotation of the earth affected pendulums in any way, then there should be no need to manually start pendulums in motion. If Earth's diurnal rotation caused the 360-degree uniform diurnal rotation of pendulums, then there should not exist a stationary pendulum anywhere on Earth." Samuel Rowbotham says, "First, when a pendulum constructed according to the plan of Mr. Foucault is allowed to vibrate, its plane of vibration is often variable. Not always. The variation, when it does occur, is not uniform, is not always the same in the same place, nor always the same either in its rate or velocity, or in its direction. It cannot therefore be taken as evidence, for that which is inconstant cannot be used in favor of or against any given proposition. It therefore is not evidence and proves nothing. Secondly, if the plane of vibration is observed to change, where is the connection between such change and the supposed motion of the earth? What principle of reasoning guides the experimenter to the conclusion that it is the earth which moves underneath the pendulum, and not the pendulum which moves over the earth? What logical right or necessity forces one conclusion in preference to the other? Thirdly, why was not the peculiar arrangement of the point of suspension of the pendulum specially considered in regards to its possible influence upon the plane of oscillation? Was it not known, or was it overlooked, or was it in the climax of theoretical revelry ignored that a ball and socket joint is one which facilitates circular motion more readily than any other?" Lady Blunt says, "We believe, with all due deference to the pendulum and its proprietor, that it proves nothing but the craftiness of the inventor, and we can only describe the show and showman as deceptions. A thing so childish as this pendulum proof that it can only be described as one of the most simple and ridiculous attempts to gull the public that has ever been conceived. It has been said that the pendulum experiment proves the rotation of the earth, but this is quite impossible, for one pendulum turns one way, and sometimes another pendulum turns in the opposite direction. Now we ask, does the earth rotate in opposite directions at different places at one and the same time? We should like to know. Perhaps the experimenters will kindly enlighten us on this point. If the earth had the terrible motions attributed to it, there would be some sensible effects of such motions, but we neither feel the motion, see it, nor hear it, and how people can stand watching the pendulum vibrate and think that they are seeing a proof of the motions of the earth almost passes comprehension. They are, however, brought up to believe it, and it is thought to be scientific to believe what the astronomers teach.
Earth spins on its axis once in every 24 hours a day. At Earth's equator, the speed of Earth's spin is about 1,000 miles per hour. The day-night has carried you around in a grand circle under the stars every day of your life, and yet you don't feel Earth spinning. Why not? It's because you and everything else, including Earth's oceans and atmosphere, are spinning along with the Earth at the same constant speed. It's only if Earth stopped spinning, suddenly, that we'd feel it. Then it would be a feeling similar to riding along in a fast car, and having someone slam on the brakes. A jumbo jet flies at about 500 miles per hour, or about half as fast as the Earth spins at its equator. But, while you're riding on that jet, if you close your eyes, you don't feel like you're moving at all. And when the flight attendant comes by and pours coffee into your cup, the coffee doesn't fly to the back of the plane. That's because the coffee, the cup and you are all moving at the same rate as the plane. Earth is moving at a fixed rate, and we're all moving along with it, and that's why we don't feel Earth's spin. If Earth's spin were suddenly to speed up or slow down, you would definitely feel it.
Tycho Brahe famously argued against the heliocentric theory in his time, positing that if the Earth revolved around the Sun, the change in relative position of the stars after 6 months' orbital motion could not fail to be seen. He argued that the stars should seem to separate as we approach and come together as we recede. In actual fact, however, after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax can be detected in the stars, proving that we have not moved at all. If Earth were truly constantly spinning eastwards at over 1,000 miles per hour, vertically fired cannonballs and other projectiles should fall significantly due west. In actual fact, however, when this has been tested, vertically fired cannonballs shoot upwards an average of 14 seconds ascending, 14 seconds descending, and fall back to the ground no more than 2 feet away from the cannon, often directly back into the muzzle.
Through time-lapse photography, the velocity of these clouds has been dramatically increased. While they were actually drifting over the mountains at approximately 27 miles per hour, they now have the appearance of moving at well over 100, 4 times their normal speed. If the clouds were stationary and the Earth was revolving underneath them, this is how it would appear if the Earth was spinning at 100 miles per hour. Yet we're told that the Earth is spinning at 10 times that speed. Consider this. Those who maintain that the Earth is a globe that spins suggest that people standing at the equator are being whirled around at approximately 1,000 miles an hour. They further maintain that the Earth is spinning around the Sun at a speed of 67,000 miles per hour, and that our Sun is supposedly racing around the center of our galaxy at some 600,000 miles per hour. And yet, you and I both know that on many days it's possible to stand outside without a single hair being messed up by the breeze.